The day they buried my mother, I wore her favorite color, sage green. She used to say it was the color of things that survived winter. I didn't plan it consciously. I just reached into my closet that morning, and my hand found the blazer without thinking, the way grief makes you do things on autopilot. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at me had dark circles under her eyes, and her mother's cheekbones and a federal court badge clipped to her lapel that she'd forgotten to take off from the night before. I unpinned it, set it on the dresser. Then I picked it up again and put it in my purse. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me already knew. My mother's name was Catherine Webb. She grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the daughter of a machinist and a school librarian, and she spent the first 30 years of her life being told she was too much. Too loud, too opinionated, too determined for someone without a degree. She waged her way through night school, got her paralegal certification, and eventually worked her way into a mid-sized law firm in Columbus, where she met my father. He was a junior associate then, handsome and charming in the way men who've never struggled for anything tend to be. She thought he was the real thing. She was wrong, but she didn't find that out until after I was born. By the time I was 7, my father had remarried. Her name was Diane. She came from money, old money, the kind that has a guest house on the property and doesn't talk about where it came from. She was polished in the way that takes decades of practice, and she despised my mother with a quiet, patient thoroughness that I didn't fully understand until I was much older. My father became a federal judge when I was 9. After that, everything tilted. The visits became shorter, then infrequent. Then there were years, entire years, where I saw him at Christmas for 3 hours, and that was the whole of it. My mother never said a bad word about him to me directly. She was careful that way, but I could see it in how she held her jaw when his name came up, that particular stillness that meant she was swallowing something large. She raised me alone. She did it without complaint, without drama, without asking him for more than the court had ordered. She worked long hours and made sure I had what I needed and read to me every single night until I was old enough to be embarrassed by it, and then she quietly kept the books on my nightstand anyway. I became a lawyer because of her. I became a federal prosecutor because of her. I became a federal prosecutor because of her. At 31, I was the youngest person in my district to make that rank, and the night I got the call, the first person I told was her. She cried. I cried. We ate takeout Thai food on her couch in Columbus and watched old episodes of a court drama she loved, and she kept squeezing my hand and saying, I always knew. I always knew. 6 months later, she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. 14 months after that, she was gone. I want to tell you that I took bereavement leave and stayed by her side and was present for all of it. I did take leave. I was there for what I could be. But grief doesn't follow a schedule, and the months of her illness were a blur of hospital parking garages and paperwork, and phone calls I made standing in courthouse hallways and nights when I drove home at 2 a.m. and sat in my car outside my apartment because I couldn't figure out how to go inside. My father called twice during her illness. Both times were brief, polite. He asked how she was doing in the tone a person uses when they're asking about an acquaintance. The second call, he mentioned that Diane sent her regards. I didn't respond to that. When my mother died on a Tuesday morning in March, I called him from the hospital parking garage. I told him. He said he was sorry. He said let him know if there was anything he could do. I never called back. The service was held at a small Lutheran church in the suburb where my mother had lived for the last 12 years. 43 people attended. Her co-workers, her neighbors, her book club, a few cousins I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. Her best friend Eleanor gave a eulogy that made everyone laugh and then made everyone cry. And I held it together through the whole thing by focusing on a water stain on the ceiling above the second pew and breathing slowly. Afterward, there was a reception at my mother's house. Her neighbors had organized it. There were casseroles and a spiral ham and 3 different kinds of potato salad and enough dessert for 100 people. The kind of abundance that shows up when a community genuinely loves someone. I was standing in my mother's kitchen, helping Eleanor put things in containers, when my stepbrother walked in. I should explain. My father and Diane had a son, Garrett. He's 4 years older than me, and we have never been in the same room for more than 40 minutes without something going wrong. He is exactly what you'd expect from a man who grew up knowing he would inherit everything. certain, dismissive, and constitutionally incapable of considering that he might be wrong about something. He became a real estate developer. He drives a very expensive truck. He walked into my mother's kitchen and looked around like he was appraising the square footage. "Your dad wanted me to come," he said. Not hello. Not I'm sorry for your loss. Just that. My dad couldn't come himself. He's got obligations this week. You know how it is. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about my mother spending 14 months dying and my father calling twice. I do know how it is, I said. I turned back to the containers. He stayed for 40 minutes, long enough to eat 2 plates of food and have a conversation in the corner with my mother's next-door neighbor that seemed to go on forever. Before he left, he stopped next to me and said, "She would have wanted the house sold quickly. Property values in this area, you know." My mother hadn't been in the ground for 6 hours. "Get out of this house," I said quietly. He left. The will had been filed with an attorney my mother trusted, a woman named Ruth who'd gone to law school at night just like her. Everything was straightforward. The house went to me. Her savings went to me. A small jewelry collection went to specific people she'd named. Eleanor got the pearls. A cousin got the ring that had belonged to my grandmother. The problem wasn't the will. The problem was a property in eastern Tennessee. My mother had inherited it from her own mother when I was about 15. 11 acres outside a small town called Greenville. A farmhouse that needed work. The kind of place that had been in a family so long, the deed went back to the 1940s. My mother had talked about it sometimes. About fixing it up, retiring there, having a garden. She never did. But she held on to it. It wasn't in the will. When I asked Ruth about it, she went quiet in a particular way. Then she told me that the property had been transferred, 2 years before my mother died, into a family trust. My father's family trust. I stood in Ruth's office and felt something go cold in my chest. How? The transfer was filed correctly, Ruth said carefully. Your mother signed the documents. She would not have done that. I know. Ruth paused. I've been looking at it. The signature is hers. The notary is valid. But the circumstances. She stopped. Meredith, your mother came to see me about 6 months before she signed. She was worried. She said someone had been pressuring her about the property. She didn't name anyone directly, but she used the word pressure. My mother's name was Catherine. People who loved her called her Cat. I used to call her Mom. I sat in that chair in Ruth's office with my hands very still in my lap, and I thought about my father calling twice. I thought about Garrett in my mother's kitchen, talking about property values. I thought about 11 acres in eastern Tennessee that had been in my mother's family since before she was born. I want to be honest about what came next, because I've been a prosecutor long enough to know that even righteous anger can make you do things that aren't clean. I didn't file anything immediately. I went home and I ran and I did not sleep, and I made a list, and I called a property law attorney in Tennessee named Howard who was 64 years old and had been practicing since before I graduated high school. He listened to everything I told him. When I finished, there was a long pause. The transfer being legal doesn't mean it wasn't coerced, he said. I know. You're going to need more than a worried conversation with her attorney. I know that too. I went back to Columbus. I went through my mother's things systematically and carefully, the way I would work a case, because that's what I had to do to keep myself from falling apart. I went through her filing cabinet, her email. She'd given me her passwords after the diagnosis. Her desk, the folder she kept in her nightstand. In the nightstand folder, behind a copy of her living will and a card I'd made her in 4th grade, was a letter. Handwritten. Hers. Dated 14 months before her death. If something happens to me before I can fix this. The property in Tennessee wasn't my choice. I was told it was the only way to settle certain debts that weren't mine. I was told there would be legal consequences if I refused. I don't believe it now, but I was scared and I was alone, and I signed. I'm sorry. The truth is in the Greenville courthouse records from 2019. Ask Howard. He'll know what to look for. She knew Howard's name because I'd mentioned him to her once in passing. She had held on to it. She had planned for this. I sat on my mother's bedroom floor and pressed that letter against my chest and breathed through my mouth for a long time. What Howard found in the Greenville courthouse records was a lien filing from 2019, a fabricated lien. I say fabricated because when we traced the originating creditor, it dissolved back to a shell company that had been registered in Delaware and dissolved 3 months after the property transfer. The lien had never been valid. It was constructed to frighten my mother into believing she owed a debt she didn't owe, and the resolution offered was the transfer of the Tennessee property. The person who'd arranged the sham company had been careful, but not careful enough, because one of the registered agents for the Delaware entity had also served on the board of a real estate holding company that Garrett ran. I had worked financial fraud cases. I knew how to read a corporate structure. I sat across from Howard over a conference table covered in documents, and I laid it out slowly, piece by piece. And when I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This is going to be a complicated fight," he said. "I know. Your father's a federal judge. Garrett has attorneys on retainer." "I know. You're sure you want to do this?" I thought about my mother saying, I always knew, squeezing my hand in the blue light of that TV screen. "Schedule the filing," I said. The case was filed in the Tennessee Circuit Court in August. I'm going to skip most of the legal details because they are boring even to me, and I went to law school. What matters is this. The filing triggered a property dispute review, which triggered a fraud inquiry by the Tennessee AG's office, which meant that what had started as a civil matter was starting to look like something else. Garrett called me in September. I didn't answer. He called 3 more times. I let them all go to voicemail. His messages started politely and ended badly. My father called once. He said he hoped we could resolve this as a family. I called back that time. "This isn't a family matter," I said. "This is a fraud matter. I'd recommend you speak with your attorney before you call me again." He was silent for a long moment. "Meredith," he said, "I'm a federal judge." "I'm aware," I said. "I'm aware," said, "I'm a federal prosecutor. I know how this works." I hung up. The complication I hadn't anticipated was my father's upcoming retirement ceremony. He was stepping down from the bench after 22 years. It was a significant event. A gathering of colleagues, former clerks, attorneys he'd worked with for decades, a few local politicians, the kind of ceremony that gets written up in the State Bar Journal. It was scheduled for the 3rd Saturday in October at the courthouse where he'd served. Diane sent me an invitation. Actual paper, cream cardstock, calligraphed. Thinking about it now, I wonder if she sent it out of genuine obligation or if she assumed I simply wouldn't come. I RSVP'd yes. Howard told me I was being reckless. My own supervisor at the district told me, carefully, that she appreciated my dedication, but that perhaps I should consider the optics. Eleanor, who had known me since I was in pigtails, just said, "Baby, what are you doing?" "I'm going to my father's retirement ceremony," I said. "I have that right." "You have that right," Eleanor agreed. "But why?" I thought about it honestly. "Because she never got to be in a room where she mattered," I said. "And I do, and I'm not going to disappear." The courthouse was full by the time I arrived. I'd driven 4 hours from Columbus, stopped once for gas and a terrible cup of coffee, and arrived with 12 minutes to spare. I wore a charcoal suit and the small gold pin the district gives to prosecutors with commendations. My heels clicked on marble floors I had walked on many times before in a professional capacity. I signed in at the reception table. The woman behind it looked at my name, looked at me, looked at her list. "Meredith Webb," I said. "IRSFBTD." She found me on the list. She gave me a program. I walked toward the main hall. Diane intercepted me in the corridor. She was wearing ivory. Always ivory, never white. "There's a difference," she once explained to me at Christmas in a tone that implied I wouldn't understand. And her hair was done, and she looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had spent decades curating a version of her life and would not tolerate anything that threatened the arrangement. She stepped in front of me. "I don't think today is appropriate for whatever you're planning," she said. She said it quietly, controlled. The tone of someone who has conducted many unpleasant conversations in semi-public spaces. "I'm here for the ceremony," I said. "I was invited. I sent that invitation as a courtesy, and I accepted it as one." She stepped slightly to the right, blocking my path more fully. "Meredith," her voice dropped. "You filed documents that are going to humiliate this family in the press. You've involved the Attorney General's office. I don't know what your mother told you." "My mother left me a letter," I said. "Handwritten, dated, witnessed by her attorney." Something moved across Diane's face. Fast, quickly controlled. This is not the place. Then step aside, I said, and we'll all have a very pleasant afternoon. She didn't move. I looked at her for a moment, and then I gently, firmly stepped around her and walked into the hall. I found a seat in the 4th row. I did not look for my father or Garrett. I sat and I read the program and I breathed slowly and I thought about my mother's bedroom floor and the letter against my chest. The ceremony was formal, the way these things are. Tributes from colleagues, a video compilation, a resolution from the state bar. I watched my father sit up at the front in his good suit, receiving the warm words, nodding with appropriate humility. And I felt something complex that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't exactly hate. It wasn't grief. It was something that sat between them. The keynote address was given by a federal appellate judge from Nashville named Constance Harwell. She had a reputation as someone who did not suffer nonsense, and her remarks were precise and warm and genuinely moving. When she talked about judicial integrity, about the courage required to follow the law even when it's uncomfortable, I felt several people in the room shift. I was one of them. Afterward, there was a reception in the atrium, champagne, catered appetizers, the comfortable murmur of people who'd spent decades in the same professional world. I was at the far end of the atrium with a glass of sparkling water when Garrett appeared at my elbow. "You need to leave," he said. Low. Not quite a hiss. "I'm having a nice time," I said. "You're embarrassing this family. I'm standing here drinking water. You know what I mean." He leaned slightly closer. "Drop the filing, Meredith. It's 11 acres. It's not worth what you're doing to this family over 11 acres. I looked at him. I thought about my mother's voice saying I was scared and I was alone, and I signed. "It's not about the acreage," I said. He said something else. I don't remember what. I was looking past him at the door because I'd seen someone walk in that I recognized. Howard had not come alone. The woman with him was Rachel Kim. She was 38 years old and worked for the Tennessee Attorney General's Fraud Division. I had spoken to her twice by phone in the last 6 weeks. She had a very calm voice and very precise questions, and I had come to understand that she was exceptionally good at her job. She was not supposed to be here today. She caught my eye across the atrium and gave me the smallest, most neutral nod I've ever seen. Garrett was still talking. I interrupted him gently. "Excuse me for a moment," I said. I crossed the atrium. I shook Howard's hand. I shook Rachel's hand. "What's happening?" I asked quietly. "The Delaware filing," Howard said. "Rachel's team found the registered agent." "We found more than that," Rachel said, same calm voice. "The same structure was used in 2 other property transfers. Different families, same pattern." I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph. I want to be precise about this, because I have seen enough prosecution work to know that triumph in these moments is not the right thing. What I felt was something closer to confirmation, like a door clicking shut on a question I'd been holding for months. "What happens now?" I said. "We'd like to speak with Garrett Holloway," Rachel said, "and we'd appreciate it if you didn't leave before we do. I will not give you a dramatized version of what came next, because the truth is actually stark enough." Rachel Kim and a colleague approached Garrett near the champagne table. They identified themselves. Garrett's face did a specific thing. I've seen it before on the stand. The moment someone realizes the documents exist, and there's no position that saves them. He started to say something. He stopped. My father was across the room talking to Judge Harwell. He saw it happen. I watched him see it happen. He didn't come over. There was no moment where he crossed the atrium and stood next to me. There was no reconciliation speech. He stayed where he was, and Judge Harwell put her hand briefly on his arm in that instinctive way people do when they sense something wrong in a room, and he said something to her in a low voice, and she looked across the atrium, and she looked at me. I don't know what he told her, but she walked over to me. "You're Catherine Webb's daughter," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." She studied me for a moment. "I knew your mother," she said. "Years ago, she came to a legal aid clinic I ran in Columbus in the early 90s. She was sharp as anyone I've worked with. I always thought she would have made an extraordinary attorney. I had not expected this. I felt my face do something involuntary. She was, I said when I could manage it. She was exactly that. Judge Harwell nodded. I'm sorry for your loss, she said. Truly. She glanced briefly toward where Rachel was still speaking with Garrett. And I suspect your mother would be very proud of you today. She shook my hand and walked away. I stood in that atrium in my charcoal suit, with champagne glasses clinking around me, and I thought, Mom, I found it. I found what you left for me. Garrett was not arrested that day. I want to be accurate about this. Because life is not a movie and legal proceedings take time and there are processes that have to be followed. What happened was that Rachel's office opened a formal investigation. The civil case I'd filed gained significantly more weight. Howard told me quietly that the other two families whose properties had been transferred through the same structure were being contacted. Over the following months, the investigation expanded. A second shell company surfaced, a third property. The Delaware entity had been used across 4 years and 3 states. Garrett's attorney negotiated. That's all I'm going to say about that, because some of it is still ongoing and some of it is not mine to tell publicly. The Tennessee farmhouse, my grandmother's land, the 11 acres my mother held on to for 30 years, was returned to my estate in February. The paperwork came on a Thursday morning, and Ruth called me at my office to tell me, and I excused myself and went to the small conference room that nobody uses and sat there for 10 minutes in the quiet. I have not been to the property yet. I've looked at it on satellite view, a greened-over rectangle of Appalachian foothills, the farmhouse a small gray square at the end of a gravel drive. I am going in the spring. I'm going to walk the whole 11 acres. I'm going to find where the property line hits the tree line on the east side where my grandmother used to say the light came through early in the morning. I'm going to bring flowers from my mother's garden. The ones she grew from seeds she kept in a mason jar on her kitchen windowsill. Sage, green things. Things that survived winter. My father and I have not spoken since October. I don't know what our relationship is or becomes from here. I have spent a lot of time sitting with the fact that he is a complicated person who did real harm, and also the only father I have, and I haven't arrived at any clean conclusion. I don't think there is one. What I know is this. My mother worked the night shift and read me bedtime stories, and kept my 4th grade card in her nightstand until the day she died. She left me a letter she hoped I'd never need, and trusted me to know what to do with it. She spelled Howard's name right, even though she'd only heard me say it once. She knew who I was. I have spent 31 years trying to be the kind of person she knew I was. I think I'm getting there. If you've ever been the person in the room that someone tried to make invisible, I want you to hear me when I say this. You do not have to disappear. The truth does not need you to perform certainty. It only needs you to show up, document what you know, and refuse to leave. That's what she taught me. That's what I did. I've thought a lot about why people like Garrett do what they do. Not the legal mechanics of it. I understand those well enough. But the deeper why. The assumption underneath all of it. Because what Garrett did to my mother wasn't just fraud. It was a bet. He bet that she was alone enough, scared enough, and unimportant enough that no one would ever look closely. He bet that a single woman who waitressed her way through night school and never made partner and lived in a suburb in Columbus didn't have anyone in her corner who knew how to fight back. He was wrong about that. But the thing I keep coming back to is that he wasn't entirely wrong about the world that made him think that way. There are a lot of people who make that exact bet every day and win. Not because they're smarter, but because the people they target don't have a letter in a nightstand, don't have a name like Howard written down somewhere from a conversation they half remembered, don't have a daughter who went to law school. My mother gave me every tool I used. She just didn't get to see me use them. That's the part that stays with me. Not the property being returned, not the investigation expanding, not the moment in that atrium when Garrett's face did the thing faces do when the documents exist and there's no out. Those moments mattered. But what I carry is the image of my mother alone in her house, scared, signing something she knew was wrong because someone had constructed just enough threat to make her feel she had no choice. She was intelligent. She was resourceful. She was not naive. And still, because she was isolated, because she didn't have the specific knowledge she needed at the specific moment she needed it, she signed. That is what I want people to hear. Not that justice always arrives. It doesn't. And I've worked in the system long enough to know that. But that the gap between people who get protected and people who get exploited is almost never about worthiness. It's almost always about information, access, and whether anyone is paying attention. My mother paid attention her whole life. She paid attention to me. She documented what she could. She left what she found in a folder behind a fourth-grade card she'd kept for 24 years. She trusted that if something happened, I would know what to do with it. That trust is the thing I feel the weight of most, not as pressure. I've processed enough of this to know the difference between honoring someone and being crushed by obligation, but as something clarifying, like a compass that doesn't move. I don't know what my life looks like from here with respect to my father. I genuinely don't. I know who he is and what he allowed, and I haven't found a clean framework for that yet. Maybe I won't. Some things don't resolve into a lesson. Some things just become part of the landscape of who you are. What I know is simpler than all of it. My mother raised me to show up, to document what I knew, to refuse to disappear when someone decided I was inconvenient. She taught me that by example every single day without ever naming it as a lesson. And in the end, the most powerful thing I did wasn't a legal filing or a deposition or a moment in a courthouse atrium. It was just not leaving. Not accepting the version of myself that Diane and Garrett needed me to be in order for their version of events to hold. You don't have to be loud about that. You don't have to make a scene. You just have to show up in the charcoal suit and sign your name on the list and walk through the door. The rest tends to follow.